Anyway, I want to do just a quick review of what we're talking about, what we've accomplished so far, and then we're going to move on to some rather interesting things. So we had noticed that the Torah, after it describes the murder, the first murder in human history, when Cain killed Hevel, so the Torah describes that Cain is kicked out of Gan Eden, and then there's a genealogical list, as you can see here, that traces the generations from Cain all the way down until Shet. Okay. Then the Torah seems to start all over again, as if it didn't have any idea of what just happened in the first 4 chapters. And it says, this is the narrative of the generations of man, describes Hashem creating the first human being. And then it lists a genealogical chart. This time, there is no Cain, no Hevel, no mention of them whatsoever. And everything starts with Shet. And the genealogical chart goes from Shet all the way down to each generation until you finally get to our hero, Noah. Then, after we know there's a guy named Noah, going from Adam and Shet down to Noah, we get to the most perplexing 4 psukim in all of the Torah. It happened when men began, this is to refresh our memory, it happened when men began to multiply upon the surface of the ground, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of Elohim saw that the daughters of man were beautiful, and they took for themselves wives of all that they chose. Hashem said, my spirit will not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh, and his days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God consorted with the daughters of man, and they bore them children. They were the mighty men of the ages, men of renown. The 4 most perplexing psukim in the Torah. And then the story of the flood. God looks down, sees everybody is pretty bad, not paying their shul dues. And then we get the flood story. Okay. What is the meaning of those 4 psukim? So we saw Rashi's approach, and we saw Rav Hirsch's approach. And I want to just do a quick review of those approaches. And let's see here. And I made this handy chart. Can everybody see the chart on my screen? So there's fundamental questions, how Rashi answered them, and how Rav Hirsch. Now, Rashi and Rav Hirsch are not alone. There's other Meforshim that are in the spirit of Rashi. Like I have here listed Rabag, Ibn Ezra, Bechor Shor, Radak, Barbanel, Rav Hirsch, also Akedet Yitzhak Shadal are like the more or less like Rav Hirsch. Let's go through the issues and how Rashi interpreted them. So these terms, which is the central issue, B'nai Ha-Elohim and Banot Ha-Adam, the children of G-O-D, capital G, small g, don't know, and the daughters of men, what are they according to Rashi? B'nai Elohim are the sons of the powerful, and the Banot Adam are the daughters of the powerless. Okay, so that's according to Rashi. Now, what happened? The powerful people in society raped the powerless. The Torah says, "Vayikchu lahem nashim." We ask, why does Tanakh bother to tell us about their mating? Was it considered problematic? And if so, yes. According to Rashi, that's the whole problem, that there was the subjugation of the powerless by the powerful. And then the very strange phrase in the Torah where God says, Lo yadon ruchi ba'adam leolam b'shegam hu basar. What does that phrase mean, according to Rashi? So Rashi interprets it that God is not going to be indecisive forever. He's going to give them a chance to do tshuva 120 years, and after that, if they don't do tshuva, they'll be destroyed. So that's Rashi's interpretation. It has nothing to do with lifespan. It has to do, the 120 years has to do with how long God's patience will last till it runs out. As we just explained, right? That's the next question. When it says, and his days will be 120, it has nothing to do with lifespan. It's a description of God's patience.
Why do you think the individuals are not judged accordingly rather than all of mankind and everything on earth, in fact? Is that unusual?
Yeah. So you're saying that usually we think that God would judge someone who acts immorally. According to Rashi, there were certain individuals who were powerful in society, and they were using their power against the powerless. So let them be punished. Why you have to start the world all over again? That was an amazing introduction to what we're going to do today after we do the review. Okay, that's true. That's a weakness with Rashi. It is a weakness with Rashi. Okay, so now, then the Torah described these Nephilim. Who are they? What's their connection to the Bnei Elohim and Bnot Adam and the Giburim, which are mentioned in the same pasuk in the continuation? So according to Rashi, the Nephilim are the offspring. They are the Bnei Elohim. They are the ones who were powerful, who fell from God's grace and caused the world to fall, according to Rashi. Are they negative characters? Of course, absolutely. There is reference to these powerful people. Now, how about the fact that the Torah mentions Nephilim again in the spy story, much later in the Torah, in Bamidbar, in Parshat Shlach? So, according to Rashi, it's not clear if there's any connection between no Nephilim and these Nephilim, because Rashi interprets Nephilim here as just being these powerful people who fell in their moral stature and caused the whole world to fall in its moral stature. So I'm not sure what that would have anything to do with the spies, according to Rashi here at least. Now, when the Torah says that there were these Nephilim before and after what? So Rashi had to come up with a very unique approach, which says that there had been a previous flood, a warning flood, which is in the generation of Enosh. And so the Nephilim existed before that warning flood, and they existed after that warning flood. And then God said, okay, I'm giving them 120 more years, and that's it. I'm going to destroy them if they don't shape up. So that's the before and after. It's that partial flood that took place. Or else you would have a hard time understanding what it means after if the demarcation is the big flood, because everybody's destroyed except for Noah. So how could it be the Nephilim that survived the flood? Okay. Now, another fundamental question is, what is the relationship between the genealogical lists and these 4 psukim? According to Rashi, nothing. There's no connection between the genealogical lists and these 4 psukim. The only connection is what comes after the 4 psukim, and that is the flood story. Okay? You can see how Rashi's approach has some very severe shortcomings. Now let's take a look at how Rav Hirsch understood this, and many others. A completely, utterly different approach. So according to Rav Hirsch, there's a total connection between the genealogical lists. There's 2 genealogical lists. One is the sons of Elohim. Who are they? They are the good guys, the descendants of Shet. Right? The good guys. And who are the Benot HaAdam, these daughters of men? They are the daughters of, through Cain, the first genealogical list. So the Torah presents genealogical list of Cain's descendants, bad people. Then Shet's, the descendants of Shet, good guys. Now, what happened? The next 4 psukim that we're talking about now is totally connected to the genealogical list, because it says that these 2 species of human beings, the good guys and the bad guys, they mated. Bad news, Rav Hirsch says. He says you have to be very careful who you marry, guys. Which is interesting. He sort of looks at it from the man's perspective. They chose Benot Adam, the daughters of Cain's descendants. And as a result of marrying women who came from bad genetic stock, what was produced? Horrible people. They no
So
longer have that sort of godly element within them. That's how Rav Hirsch explained this. Yes.
I mentioned it before, but I thought when you look at the genealogical tables, Noach married to Naamah, that she is from the family of Cain, and he's considered the only one who's a tzaddik.
Yeah. So the Torah doesn't mention in this list Naamah, right? That there's Naamah. You show me in the Torah where it says that Noach married a woman Naamah. That's homework for you. Okay.
Where did I get that from? I didn't make it up.
You got it from the same place that Abraham went into a fiery furnace, etc. Okay. So the now, what is the when God says, "My spirit won't dwell within forever"? See, Rav Hirsch understands it not like Rashi. Rashi says, "My spirit won't quarrel within me forever. I'm going to take a stand." Rav Hirsch understands it as the godly element, my spirit, meaning the godly element within the human being, is no longer dominant because of the intermixing of these two lineages. That's how Rav Hirsch understood that phrase. So therefore, since man has become genetically defective, where the godly element has been made secondary, so we're going to have to destroy the human race and start all over again. And what is this 120? Same, just like Rashi. God says, I'm going to give them 120 years, see if they can overcome their genetic disabilities. Now, who are these Nephilim? According to Rav Hirsch, they are the descendants of Cain, who godly image is very a low burner with them, and whose physicality dominated them. That's why they're big, because they're so focused on the physical. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, are you ready for a third approach? I'm going to show you something quite amazing. Pull it up. Okay. This is from a rabbi who's in the faculty of Bar Ilan University, Rav Spiro. And he has an analysis here. We're going to read through it, not his introduction. His introduction, he just says what we said, the different approaches, and he discusses what he thinks of the shortcomings, and he has a better approach. So just put on your seatbelts for this. So we're going to start with where it says Aleph here. Do you have the text in front of you, everybody, showing on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're starting here where it says Aleph. Now, Bruce, you would ask the question before. You would think that God would punish the bad guys, according to Rashi, right? See, according to Rav Hirsch, your question is answered. Because according to Rav Hirsch, the human race became genetically tainted. So we have to destroy it. According to Rashi, your question is good because it's a few powerful people persecuting, subjugating powerless people. Now, he has the same question, Rav Spiro, as you had. The nature of the cataclysmic destruction of the flood testifies to the fact that it's not just a punishment over a specific sin. That's your question, Bruce, right? Like starting all over again? So if it's a specific sin, get rid of the people who did it. Rather, it's a complete collapse of the original divine scheme. I'm going to create humanity, and God says, this project failed. We have to start all over again. So therefore, we have to have a global new beginning, creating new conditions so that God doesn't fail again, as it were. Now, that raises severe philosophical problems about God like doing something that doesn't exactly work out. put that aside. And he goes on. Katuv ki hishchit kol basar darko al haaretz. It says that all flesh corrupted its way upon the earth. Lomer Rashi b'shem Chazal. Rashi quoted the Talmud. Afilu behema chayav va'of nizkakim l'sheinam minam. What does it mean? All flesh distorted its way. Rashi, quoting a midrash, says that even the animals were immoral. They interbred immorally. Klomar takala koshi b'talich haganeti evil lideidat balei chaim miflatztiim. He says that midrash that Rashi quotes seems to hint that there is a genetic corruption that took place, which created monstrous living things.
Yeah.
By the way, it sounds a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. לכן נראה שגם מפגש בני אלוהים עם בנות האדם היה אירוע דומה שאולי יכול היה להביא ללידות לא שגרתיות. So he says perhaps this mating of the Bnei Elohim and Bnot Adam is also some genetic malfunction which created monstrous beings. He's getting us curious what's going on here. ראיה מן הכתוב מאפשרת פירוש כזה נמצא בפתיחת לפרק ה' הנ"ל, ויולד בדמותו בצלמו ויקרא את שמו Shet. The Torah describes when Shet was born that he was made in God's likeness and his image. אולי יש כאן רמז לכך שקודם לכן לא הוליד אדם בדמותו כצלמו. He says, could it be that only Shet is named by name as being made in God's image, but whatever human beings were before that were not in God's image? What is he talking about? You're about to see. Maybe the list of Cain's descendants, that first genealogical list, were mutants. Some kind of mutants. Yitzurim enoshim shelahem tchunot mishunot. They were human beings, but with strange character qualities. Like, for instance, Gvohim. They're gigantic. Chazakim. Strong like Hercules. O yafim b'mida bilti regila. Or incredibly beautiful. Those are very unusual character traits. Big, strong, and beautiful. Vehem hishtabshu botan tchunot yotzei dofen. And they, whoever these species were, used these qualities, use their qualities to subjugate others. So the reference to Nephilim, these giants, Giburim, these strong people, Anshe Shem, the men of renown, he says this is a mutant race that used their special powers as a result of their genetic defect to subjugate others. You'll see how this is going to be a really interesting combination of elements of Rashi and elements of Rav Hirsch.
Can you call big, strong, and beautiful mutants? I mean, many people are big, strong, and beautiful.
Yeah, I know, Bruce. It's sad. Hang on. You're right. It's weird. But hang on. Let's listen to his argument. Now, you ready for this? Now he's going to get to the punchline. Mikan magi'im lahatzati. Put on your seatbelts. Here's my suggestion, he says. Ulai HaTorah meramezet po al erua histori v'gorali shekara be'avar ha'amum. Maybe the Torah here is alluding to a historical event which was decisive, which occurred in the dark past. V'lo yadanu alav ad lo mikvar, which we didn't really know about until now. Now meaning now. He's saying that the Torah is alluding to something that we didn't fully understand until certain research has discovered something about the human past that we didn't know before. What is that? Ba'achrona hayu divuchim al tagliot philantologiot chadashot. The Dafka Baritz. There have been some paleontological discoveries made recently that actually in Eretz Israel, and these recent paleontological discoveries are shedding light on something that we didn't appreciate in the past about the development of the human species. Anthropologim, Homo sapiens, הופיע רק אחרי היעלמותו של היצור האנושי, האנדריוטלי, שהיה קודם לכן. The hard words are these words in English. He says, up till now, anthropologists said there were Neanderthals, and then they disappeared, and then there were Homo sapiens. They're all human beings, right? But there's these two sort of branches. There's the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens in order, not overlapping. Even those who held there may have been some overlap, say that there might have been a little bit of overlap, but they didn't interbreed because they were too genetically different to interbreed. The notion that they would procreate together was not a possibility. That's the old theory. DNA של האדם, האנדרטלי מוכיח שההומו ספיאנס והאנדרטלים חיו זה לצד זה זמן רב והתחתנו ביניהם. Guess what? Current research says that they coexisted and, in fact, interbred. Venotsar eruv geneti. That created this combination from a genetic perspective.
They say that we all have a little bit of Neanderthal genes in us, a small percentage.
Yeah, some of us have more than others. Also, it turns out the Neanderthals are not as primitive as we once thought they were. Now, you ready for this? With this recent discovery in anthropology and paleontology, our parsha becomes totally clear. עכשיו אפשר לפרש בהתאם להקשר הכרונולוגי של הפרשה שאכן מדובר בתקופה שבה כמה מבני משפחת קין שהיו חזקים וגבוהים מאחרים הציגו עצמם כאלים למחצה. It says the following. You know the genealogical list of Cain? That's the Neanderthals. And they are gigantic and powerful because that species of Homo sapiens, or human beings, was in fact more powerful. And they used that power to subjugate others. Who are the others? Benot Adam, Homo sapiens. So the Neanderthals, which is the descent of Cain, then forced themselves upon the Homo sapiens, the female Homo sapiens, right? And that's what it means when it says that they took for themselves women from all that they chose. The Neanderthals took women from the Homo sapiens. And that's why God said, all flesh has destroyed its path upon the earth. It's global. So this is similar to Rav Hirsch in the sense that the two lines are mixing, but not like Rav Hirsch said, where it's, bad guys, descendants of Cain, and against good guys, the sons of Seth. It's the Neanderthals who are powerful against Homo sapiens who are less powerful, resulting in a global genetic disaster, requiring, so it's not just a sin, not like Rashi, right? Though it has the element of Rashi that is the powerful against the powerless. But according to this, they're powerful because they're Neanderthals against the Homo sapiens, which are not as strong. And it's like Rav Hirsch in the sense that now we understand why he had to destroy the whole world, because there are no human beings in the way they're supposed to be. It's a genetic disaster. He says So therefore, God's decision to destroy the world is not so much a response to specific sin, but a total collapse of the genetic system of human beings.
Who says this?
Dr. Shimon Eliezer Halevi Spiro.
I've just seen his name. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
What about the pre-Neam and Neanderthal? Such as, for example, the group they found in Ramla this past June, which precedes the Neanderthal by about 140,000 years.
Yeah, so I don't know. We'd have to ask Rabbi Dr. Spiro, but maybe he might say that that's kind of a sort of a precursor to the Neanderthal. Now, and the Torah is only focusing on kind of the stage of humanity that's more recent, that's more relevant, perhaps. So,
what would have happened to let nature play its course and just have these hybrids, now bigger, stronger, smarter, whatever they are, and let nature play it out? And I'm not sure the need to wipe out the planet.
So hang on a second. I just want to just finish the last paragraph, and then we'll go and answer these questions. So, Lefi paleontologia, right? Paleontology. אחרי דורות של נדידה מוצלחת ביבשות נעלמו פתאום כל עקבות האנדרטלים מסיבה לא ברורה. The paleontologists say that there was an extensive period of time in which the Neanderthals spread out among the continents, and all of a sudden they just disappear. And the paleontologists cannot explain why. Vila Homo sapiens, Yarshu Adarts. And then the paleontological record has the Homo sapiens. And so what happened to those Neanderthals? Well, now we know. According to the Torah, the one family, which is the seed of Shet, who are the Homo sapiens, so that represents God's saying, we're going to take one untainted family of the Homo sapiens, and we're going to start all over again in order to create the genetic base in order to accomplish the goal that human beings were supposed to accomplish. Okay, so Bruce, you were asked a question.
Yeah, that the same paleontologists and anthropologists suggest that Neanderthals were not capable of monogamy, speech, something very natural, and that they simply were outcompeted by the less robust Homo sapiens. Nothing supernatural or nothing on a worldwide cataclysmic level. They gradually disappeared from the scene, but that all of us have actually some of their genes in us. There's still no need to, unless this is simply retrojecting a nice story of why there's evidence around the world for a flood, which there is, but this doesn't mean to wipe out all the animals, to kill everything. It makes God, very cruel, really, rather than just saying, let nature play its course. They eventually disappeared, and the people that are around today are the product. You don't need a flood story.
It's the first story of climate change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I think maybe what you're asking is that, at least the last point, there was no reason to kill off all the animals, right? If the problem was the corruption of the genetic pool that was supposed to have been created, because the Neanderthals and conquered genetically, as it were, the Homo sapiens, why'd kill all the animals? So I could give an answer, but it's, how else are you supposed to wipe out all of humanity?
Just a plague that affects people and affects them in particular.
Yeah, okay.
Very specific plague.
Perhaps it's a good question.
Or the way it has occurred. If you remove the flood story, what do we say actually happened to them? They were simply outcompeted over time, the Homo sapiens.
Yeah, it's actually, according to this, it's interesting, because he's suggesting the Neanderthals, in a certain sense, conquered the Homo sapiens, the exact opposite, that they corrupted the gene pool, and therefore God said, this is never going to work. I better just take one guy who still seems to have some goodness left in him, some kind of genetic purity of sorts, and he'll be the progenitor of like a new start.
Well, I don't know why in genetic purity, if you're bigger, stronger, smarter, why that's not a good idea. Why put the adjective good or bad on these people?
Yeah, because they were brutes morally. In other words, they
You
used
know,
their
they're primitive.
brutish physicality for the purpose of subjugating those that are weaker. That's like Rashi. So you see how this Rav Spiro takes elements from Rashi and elements from Rav Hirsch, and he puts them together, and he tries to then map it along with these new anthropological studies or paleontological studies.
And
Okay,
with that in mind, God would wipe out the world because it was a slave-based society. They sent a huge flood and wipe out everyone. There are a lot of slave owners out there, and that's
Yeah.
like unethical.
so that still leaves the question: why kill all the animals? Right? Why was that necessary? So now I want to go to the third approach. So that actually was a third approach. It was sort of a synthesis of Rashi and Rav Hirsch, and I really looked at that more playfully than in a serious fashion. But now we're going to get serious. So put in your seatbelts, please. We're going to take a look at a classic collection of Midrash. Now, before we do this, I just want to remind ourselves that Rashi was based upon Midrash Rabbah. It's Midrash Rabbah that said that the Bnei Elohim were the powerful people of society, not Neanderthals, according to the Midrash, right? But they were powerful people because the word Elohim can mean powerful. El means power. So Elohim can mean powerful, and it also can mean judges because they also have authority and power in society. Okay. And you'll remember that was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Midrash Rabbah. And the same Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, cursed be anybody who would suggest that Bnei HaElohim means sons of gods. That's a strong statement. We're going to look at Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is a collection of Midrash that tells the story of creation and the subsequent stories in the Torah of the patriarchs, etc., from Midrashic perspective. Midrashic collections are hard to date, but there's a lot of evidence that this comes from something like the 8th century because it makes repeated reference to Islam, Yishmael, and in ways that seem to reflect that there was that the author of this collection lived in the context of Islamic domination. Let's take a look at what this Midrash says. Now, nowadays, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is like, yeah, Midrash Rabbah, Tanhuma, Sifrei, Sifra, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, Sikhat Rav Kana. These are all well embraced collections of Midrash that are considered to be authoritative and kosher. So let's take a look. We're going to take a look at just one paragraph from chapter 21, and then we'll skip to chapter 22. I also want to warn you, Midrash by definition always quotes verses from Tanakh. Don't even try to understand what the connection is between the Midrash and the verses. Just get the narrative. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, in Breshit, now the Midrash quotes, it teaches. It was taught in a Braita. Rabbi Zera said, when the Torah says, which is in the midst of the garden, in the midst of the garden, here is a euphemism, which is in the midst of the garden. Garden means here a woman. She's compared to a garden. As it is said, a garden locked up is my sister, a bride. Don't think about that too much. Just as with this garden, a real garden, whatever is sown therein, if you plant pumpkins, you get a pumpkin. You plant tomatoes, you get tomatoes. It produces and brings forth whatever you plant. So with this woman, that's Eve, what seed she receives, she conceives and bears through sexual intercourse. That's an introduction to the next part of the narrative. Samael, that's Satan, riding on the serpent, came to her, and she conceived. So the serpent, who is the devil, Satan, had relations with Eve. Afterwards, Adam came to her, and she conceived Abel, as it is said, and Adam knew Eve, his wife. What is the meaning of knew? He knew that she had conceived, and she saw his likeness, the baby, that it was not of the earthly beings, but of the heavenly beings. And she prophesied and said, Haniti Ishet Hashem, I have gotten a man with the Lord. That's why Cain is called Cain, according to the Torah, because it evokes the word kaniti. I have acquired a man with God. Pirkei Rabbi Elazar interprets, I've acquired a man with God, meaning with a godly being. Who's that godly being? Satan. She looks at her child and she says, well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. This child I just gave birth to is not human. I made this baby by having intercourse with a godly being. Who's that godly being? Satan. That's the snake. Everybody got that? Okay. Don't share this with your grandchildren.
Well, he's not
Rabbi
a bad
Ishmael-
guy, right? He's just an angel. He's not a bad, does it have a bad connotation even from the beginning?
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah.
Rabbi Ishmael said, from Shem descended all the generations of the righteous, and from Cain descended all those who rebel and sin against God and say, we do not need the drop of your rain. See, that's the answer to your question, right? Cain, who's Cain now? Cain is the product of Chava and the devil. That sexual union between the snake, Satan, and Chava produced Cain, and from Cain comes rotten people. Rabbi Yossi said, Cain and Abel were twins, as it is said, and she conceived and bare with a Cain. At that hour, she had additional capacity for childbearing. Don't worry about the derivations too much. And she continued to bear his brother Abel. According to that, Cain and Hevel were both products of Satan, according to that opinion. Okay, fine. Next chapter. There's a whole bunch more, but not relevant to us in chapter 21. I just wanted you to get the proper lineage of how Cain and Hevel were created. Now we're going to get to our episode of the Bnei Elohim mating with the Bnot Adam. And Adam lived 130 years, and he begat in his own likeness after his image. Hence thou mayest learn that Cain was not of Adam's seed, nor after his likeness, nor after his image. You know why why Cain didn't look like his father, ostensibly Adam, is because Adam, as we just saw in the previous chapter, was not his father. Who was his father? Satan. Adam did not beget his own image until Seth was born. According to this, the first kid that Adam was the father is Shem. Now, think about the genealogies. Remember, there are two genealogical lists. One, Adam and Chava, Cain and Hevel. And then a new genealogical list, as if the first one didn't exist, Adam and Shem. And only there it says that he was in his image and his likeness. That's because all the previous generations, Cain and Hevel and the lineage, they were satanic. Because the Satan was their father. Rabbi Yishmael said, from Shet arose and were descended all the generations of the righteous. From Cain arose and were descended all the generations of the wicked who rebel and sin, etc. Rabbi Meir said, now think about the psukim, the 4 psukim. Rabbi Meir said, the generations of Cain went about stark naked, men and women, just like beasts. And they defiled themselves with all kinds of immorality. A man with his mother or his daughter, or with the wife of his brother, or the wife of his neighbor, in public and in the streets, with evil inclination, which is in the thought of their heart, as it is said, and the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth. Rabbi said, Rabbi Yunasi, the angels who fell from their holy place in heaven saw the daughters of the generations of Cain walking about naked, with their eyes painted like harlots. And they went astray after them and took wives from amongst them, as it is said, and the sons of Elohim saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took from them wives of all that they chose. Uh-oh. What happened here? The daughters of the lineage of Cain were immoral, dressing like prostitutes, prancing around. That's the Cain lineage. There's these angels up there in heaven. And these angels look down and they see these beautiful, enticing daughters of Cain. That's the Benot Adam. Bnei Elohim are these angels. They look down. And what's an angel to do? Beautiful prancing around women, dressed like that, etc. Rabbi Yoshua said the angels are flaming fire. As it is said, his servants are flaming fire, and fire came with the koishin of flesh and blood, but did not burn the body. But when they fell from heaven, from their holy place, their strength and stature became like that of the sons of men, and their frame was made of clods of dust, as it is said, my flesh is clothed with worms and clods of dust. Don't try to understand the psukim very well. These angels took on some kind of human form, and they mated. The angels mated with these Cainite daughters. Rabbi Tzadok said, and guess who the children were? From them there were born the Anakim, these giants, these giants. That's the offspring of these angels who couldn't resist the daughters of Cain. From them were born the giants who walked with the pride in their heart and who stretched forth their hand to all kinds of robbery and violence and shedding of blood, as it said. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak. So these giants, the Nephilim, they are the offspring of the angels mating with these daughters from the Cain lineage. Rabbi Yeshua said the Israelites are called sons of God. As it is said, you are the sons of the Lord your God. But angels are also called sons of God, as it says, quotes a verse from Job. And whilst they were still in their holy place in heaven, they were called sons of God. As it said, and also after that, when the sons of God came in with the daughters of men, they bare children to them. The same became the mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So they were sons of God before they went down from heaven and mated with these women. Then they weren't so godly anymore. Rabbi Levi said, they bare their sons and increased and multiplied like a great reptile, 6 children at each birth. So these Canaanite women, or Cainite, I should say, women, who mated with these angels, they bore children that were, in a manner which was incredible, 6 children at each birth. And when they came out of the womb, in that very hour, they stood on their feet and spoke Hebrew and danced before them like sheep. As it is said, they cast their young like sheep and their children danced. Don't worry about the verses. Noah said, turn from your ways and evil deeds, so that he bring not upon you the waters of the flood and destroy all the seed of the children of men. They said to him, behold, we will restrain ourselves from multiplying and increasing so as not to bruise the offspring of the children of men. What did they do? When they came to their wives, they spilled the issue of their seed upon the earth so as not to produce offspring of the children of men. So they practiced coitus interruptus in order not to have children, because Noah had warned them. But it didn't do any good, because that itself was a sin. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was spilled. So when the Torah says that the earth was corrupted, it's actually an allusion to the fact that the earth is full of the semen. They said, if he bring from heaven the waters of the flood upon us, behold, we are of high stature. So these offspring are giants. They said, okay, God, bring it on, but we're not worried. Because if you try to drown us in a flood, we're very tall. Our heads will stick up. The waters not reach up to our necks. And if you bring the waters of the depths against us, but maybe the water will come up from the springs, right, and drown us in that way. Behold, the soles of our feet can close up all the depths. They have big feet, close up these mayanot, these springs of water, and they will be safe. What did they do? They put forth the soles of their feet and closed up all the depths. Now God's having a hard time figuring out what's he going to do. How's he going to destroy all the earth? What did the Holy and Blessed Be do? He heated the waters of the deep, and they arose and burnt their flesh and peeled off their skin from them. So that's how God destroyed all of the planet, by inundating it with boiling water. That is Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. Okay. So what I'd like to try now in the last few minutes is just to get the story straight. Let's go back to the fundamental questions and see if we can answer them according to Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. So, who are the Bnei Elohim and Benot Adam according to Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer? Anybody want to help me out here? Who are the Bnei Elohim? No, someone want to help me? So they are these angels. And who are the Benot Adam? They are human beings, but specifically daughters from Cain. The term Bnei Elohim is an odd choice for a monotheistic work. Like the Torah doesn't refer to an immortal being or to a human in a lofty position. Very clear, according to Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, it's a immortal being. These are supernatural entities, not like Rashi. What's shocking is this is exactly what Rishon Bar Yochai said not to say. Right? When he said, "Cursed be anybody who thinks that Bnei Elohim is a reference to some deity," but Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer does say that. Then when the Torah says they took for themselves wives. So why does the Torah bother to tell us about their mating? It's absolutely critical, because the offspring of the mating between these angels and the daughters of Cain were monsters, and therefore they had to be destroyed. Was it considered problematic? And if so, why? Definitely problematic, the mating, right? The angels should have controlled themselves. Now, when the Torah says, "My spirit will not dwell among man forever, he's only flesh." So what does this phrase mean, according to Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer? I'm not sure. I don't know exactly what that means. It could be interpreted in the same way Rashi and Rav Hirsch interpret, that God says, "I'm just giving them a certain amount of time before I kill them." That's probably what Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer understands it. It's not referring to the age of the human being. It refers to the fact that I'm going to give 120 years. Let's see what happens. And then the Torah says they're going to get 120 years, right? That's it's God expressing his views. It'll last 120 years. Okay. Well, what about the Nephilim? Let me just finish. Hang on one second. Let's just get through this, and then we'll take questions. Who are the Nephilim? The Nephilim, according to Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, I think, were the products of the intercourse between the angels and the daughters of Cain. Even though I might have thought Nephilim are fallen angels, but Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer didn't seem to say that, though there are other sources that do say things like that. So are these negative or positive characters? According to others, are very negative, obviously. They're monstrous. And do they have a relationship to the Nephilim that are in the spy story? Others did not address that particular issue. Now, what's the connection between the genealogical lists? So now we understand from Rabbi Eliezer, it's because the daughters of Cain who are bad, because they're children of Satan, descendants of Satan. And that's why they acted so immorally that enticed the angels to come down and mate with them, right? So that's the connection between the lineage and these 4 psukim and then the flood story. Now, what does Shet have to do with it? Not much, except for from Shet comes the saving remnant, Noah. Okay, and of course, the purpose of the story is to explain the flood, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, we have a few more minutes now. Questions, comments, anything? Danny, you had a comment. Arthur.
Yeah, Nephilim are mentioned in Numbers 13:33 also, where they saw these, well, I guess giant size we call it.
Yeah.
So did they survive? Were they still in existence in Canaan?
Yeah. So this is the problem, because it should be that if God destroyed the entire planet, then why are these Nephilim still existing? That's why Rashi's approach was good, because Rashi understood when it said before and after, it meant before and after the trial flood. It still doesn't really explain the Nephilim mentioned later, unless you want to say that it became a metaphor. There's Nephilim meant something very technical in this narrative, but it then became, whenever you want to talk about someone very intimidating and tall, they're called Nephilim, but metaphorically, not that they're actually remnants of the racial Nephilim, which are mentioned here.
Except we don't see it anywhere else.
I mean, that doesn't bother me too much. It's just it became a metaphor for like scary people. And the fact that Torah mentions it several times,
I don't think this is what they meant, but it's a good interpretation of why we had the Mabul. I like that. I think it would make an interesting movie.
Yeah, it would. It would. Now,
It was. They made the movie Noah with something like this.
Now, Danny, you were going to say something. Here's your question.
What troubles me, is this Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer thing, just like we say about Midrash, you've got to be a fool to ignore it all, but you've also got to be a fool equally to take it all literally. I mean, Rambam would have a field day with this thing, because he would say that it's total kfira to suggest that angels will copulate with human beings, because angels do not have a body by definition. And if you don't believe that, then you're a shaigetz, you're an apikoros, according to Rambam, basically. So what are we supposed to do with Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer? Are we supposed to just say, well, that's his opinion and Rambam can go take a hike?
Yeah. So that was a very good segue to next week's discussion, because next week will be devoted to how do we process this? And I'll add some more to your questions. Not only is it a little strange to think an angel has a body, though the Torah seems to describe angels having bodies, if you take the Torah literally when it describes angels. But angels that sin, what does that mean? That maybe is even more problematic philosophically. There's only one being on this planet that has free will. I thought it was us, Homo sapiens.
Well, where'd we get that idea from?
So you're saying, why should we be necessarily locked into some idea that only human beings have free will? Maybe their angels have free will too.
There's many types of these angels. It's just a word. It means not from this earth. And there's many types of creatures not from this earth. And we don't know all of them.
They couldn't be from the Koach Acher, like Hashem created the forces, and those forces have a mind of their own in a way. And they
yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I mean, doesn't this strike one as, if you say that there's some kind of supernatural beings, these are supernatural beings, that can rebel against God, doesn't that somehow reduce the pure monotheism that there is only one supernatural being, and that's God? He creates nature, he creates human beings. Human beings have free will. But to say there's like a Christ and an antichrist, I'll just use that expression for the purpose of the discussion here, that does not sound Jewish. And it, as a matter of fact, sounds like an impingement upon the notion of God's absolute and utter sovereignty.
Well, why do we feel compelled to lock into the supernatural aspect of it? It's natural. We don't understand it. It's perfectly natural.
But that is because that's what Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says. It says that they were angels and they were having a good time up in heaven, and they looked down and see these daughters of Cain prancing around, dressed up like prostitutes and made up like prostitutes. They couldn't control themselves. They came down to earth and mated with them.
Well, he's allowed to be
Why
wrong.
is it any worse than any other bad thing that happened? The same question. How could there be bad in the world if God's creating it? It's the same.
That's also a good question. You know, to say that there's some kind of like independent force of evil, you know, Christ, Antichrist, this is really disturbing. So we're going to have to bring it to a close, but I'm glad these questions were asked.
Aren't we really talking about Tselem Elohim?
What do you mean?
In other words, like we may define that as free choice, or the ability to create. Maybe that's the only real difference here. Maybe they existed, they had the ability to reason, which I think all animals sort of have that ability to some extent, you know, so maybe it was just a little more developed, and Adam was even more developed because of the Tselem Elohim, which basically gave him the ability to discern even more and even have free choice. But it appears free choice exists in everything. Look at the trees. The trees didn't taste like the fruit.
I lose sleep over those midrashim as well. You know, to say that there's a precedent for the idea that something in nature can have free will and sin. You're right. There's a whole midrashic tradition like that. I'm bothered by it. Philosophically, I think it's difficult. Let's just put it on a hold now. Is anybody able to sleep between now and next Sunday?
Hard. It'll be hard now.
I know. Good. That's the answer I wanted. So next week, we're going to try to see where Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer gets this idea from that we discussed. We're going to compare it to earlier sources and pagan myths, which raises itself all kinds of problems about what the heck is this doing in the Torah, this story, at least according to Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, what's it doing there? And we will take a look at a very fascinating analysis of Umberto Cassuto, who looks at this story of Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, and he actually thinks in certain ways this is the most straightforward interpretation of those verses. But how do you reconcile that with a monotheistic Torah?
Are we allowed to look at other traditions around the world, or we're locked into this one?
I mean, the way other traditions understand these four psukim.
Yeah, because the very idea of a flood, what happened after the flood, before the flood, every society has their story, interestingly enough, indicating there was some type of a flood and something that rebooted society, and every society seems to have their story. Yeah.
Okay. That'll be discussed. We discuss especially Cassuto. What do you do with the fact that there seem to be myths in the Torah that are in common with the pagan world? What are the implications of that? So we'll wrestle with that next week, and hopefully we'll be good Jews after that discussion as well. So
Thank
try to
you.
sleep a little bit between now and then. Take care, everybody.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you. Sure.
Bye bye.